can enlighten you on the Times story, and the Times story is nonsense. It quotes anonymous sources, and I think you always have to be very, very wary when you have any journalism which is based on anonymous sources. And I can also tell you that there are no differences within the party on this issue. We are still totally opposed to any form of a Northern Ireland only backstop and a border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, which is our main market. And we are certainly not going to be allowed ourselves to be put in a situation where the part of the United Kingdom to which we belong would have to be regarded as a third country when it comes to trade between Northern Ireland and GB.
The main cross-border businesses involves agricultural products and animals. Would you be prepared to sort of bend the rules on that and have a one Ireland arrangement for foodstuffs and agriculture?
Well, I mean, first of all, we already have an arrangement whereby any live animals coming into Northern Ireland are checked down the road from where I live here at the Port of Larne. 100% checks are done there. So the security as far as animal diseases coming into Northern Ireland are concerned are already dealt with in the current arrangements. And secondly, we have always, and we told Theresa May this away 2.5 years ago, and in fact it was part of the joint agreement, we have always said that if there was to be any alignment with EU rules, then that should be something which the Northern Ireland Assembly would look at. They would weigh up, is this important for the agri-food industry in Northern Ireland? Does it create any problems between Northern Ireland and our main market in GB? And if it didn't, of course we would always engage in that kind of north-south cooperation, because we have done that anyway through the Northern Ireland Assembly since 2000.
Okay, but obviously after Brexit there'll be Northern Ireland and the South will be in different trading blocks. But what you seem to be saying to me is you wouldn't regard those sort of arrangements as putting a barrier down the Irish Sea.
The important thing would be that, first of all, we would not be giving carte blanche to the EU and saying whatever regulations you introduce in future will have to apply to Northern Ireland, because, of course, some of those could create a barrier down the Irish Sea and could have a detrimental impact on our access to our main market in GB. But what we have said and what we have consistently said is where it makes sense and where it does not disrupt our trade between Northern Ireland and GB to align ourselves to EU regulations, then we would do that. And that's no different, by the way, than what the British government has said, because they have indicated that in any future trading relationship with the EU, of course they would always look at EU regulations. They would have to do that anyway if they wanted to export to the EU, and would either adopt EU standards or else have EU equivalents. And, that's perfectly possible. And, I think that what this debate shows is that there are far more variations to ensuring that trade can flow freely than the very narrow demands which have been made by the EU for political purposes.
Okay, I mean, you use the word alignment, but that does mean that in this area of agriculture and foodstuffs, Northern Ireland would be aligned to the European Union in a different way from the mainland Great Britain.
Well, we have lots of rules because there are issues which are devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly at present, and there are lots of ways in which we would look at changes in Northern Ireland and see how do they relate to the Northern Ireland economy. For example, we have different rates of air passenger duty, and we sacrifice some public expenditure in order to have different rates of air passenger duty in Northern Ireland because we were competing with the Irish Republic. So, we look at these things on a case-by-case basis. But the important thing is this, that we will not, and we have made it quite clear, we will not adopt any EU rules which hurt our relationship with our main market in the UK, in GB, sorry.
Now, what about alignment? Would alignment mean agreeing to be bound by EU rules in these areas?
No, it wouldn't. And To agree to be bound by EU rules would be like giving the responsibility for laws in Northern Ireland to the EU. We're leaving the EU. We're not going to become some kind of annex of the EU, but it will make sense. And indeed, the UK government has said that they would do the same in relation to the whole of UK trade, where it makes sense. If you want to export a car, for example, to Germany, and there are certain emission standards which have to be adopted there, then the rules in Britain would adopt those emission standards. And we're saying that if in the field of agriculture, because there's quite a considerable cross-border trade in agriculture, it makes sense to adapt some of the EU rules, then we would do that.
But there is a question, isn't there, of who confirms that those standards and rules are being obeyed? I mean, because there's no point in having agreed standards and they're not enforced.
And, well, if they became regulations or became laws in Northern Ireland, that would be up for the authorities in Northern Ireland to make sure that firms abided by those standards.
And what about the need, as you've said, the need for Stormont, for the Northern Irish Assembly to agree this? We don't have Stormont at the moment, and we're unlikely to have it before the crucial time in October. So could the British government, would it be acceptable to you for the British government to agree to this on your behalf?
Well, I mean, first of all, when we leave on the 31st of October, all of our rules will be in line with the rules in the EU anyway, because that was what the whole purpose of bringing EU rules onto the UK law book during the last couple of years in Parliament. So there won't be any difference on day one anyhow. This really would refer to changes after day one. If, for example, the EU changed its rules, then we would have to consider, do we change our rules to stay in line, or do we adapt our rules to stay in line, or do we introduce rules which are equivalent to the EU rules? That is how it would be done. And in the absence of Stormont, if Stormont is not up and running, eventually there's going to have to be direct rule imposed from Westminster, and then be up to the ministers from Westminster who be responsible for the government departments to introduce those rules if and when they were necessary.
So, Mr. Wilson, I mean, the DUP's somewhat celebrated for saying no. I just want to ask you a very simple question. Do you think the UK is going to leave the European Union with a deal on October the 31st?
Well, I think that it's been made more difficult by the way the Remainers have sought to undermine the government over the last week in Parliament. But the one thing I'm sure of in speaking to the Prime Minister is that the Prime Minister and the government are determined to do their best to leave on the 31st of October with a deal, and with a deal which does not break up the United Kingdom and which is fair to the United Kingdom and which honours the referendum result. And, you know, that requires the same political will on the EU side. Unfortunately, I think they've been encouraged in their intransigence by the way in which Parliament has tied the Prime Minister's hands. OK, Mr Wilson, thank you very much indeed for joining us there from Northern Ireland.